Excellent. Evening everyone, I'm Craig Woodhouse, I'm the political correspondent of The Sun on Sunday, and I'm delighted to welcome you here to this policy exchange event sponsored by British Gas on whether UK energy consumers are getting a good deal. And if our postbag is anything to go by, the answer to that question is no. It's one of the issues that we get written to about with very, very irate readers, almost more than any other. And the reasons for that, I'm sure you're all aware, you'll have read them in most newspapers. Average bills are now £1,329 according to Ofgem. £102 of that is profit, and customers seem to see no relationship between falling wholesale prices and the bills that they are having to pay. This, obviously, as we all know, culminated in Ed Miliband's energy price freeze a year ago announcement, and we're still talking about it, which means that perhaps we haven't made the progress that we perhaps would have wanted to. So to discuss whether or not we're getting a fair deal and what we can do to get a fair deal, on my left we have Amber Rudd, who is the Junior Minister at the Department for Energy and Climate Change, Conservative, 2010 intake, and will tell us what's going on over there with a Lib Dem boss. On the who wants to? Oh, is he? Anyway,
don't start knocking him yet.
All right, okay. On the far left, Ian Peters, who's Managing Director of British Gas Retail Energy. So if any of you've got any specific problems about your supply, on my right, we've got Professor George Yarrow, who's Chair of the Regulatory Policy Institute. And on the far right we have Simon Moore, who's the Senior Research Fellow for Environment and Energy at Policy Exchange. I'm keen to make this session as interactive as possible, so I will try and keep the speakers down to 5 minutes or so each, and then open the floor up to questions. Lots of content to get going on, so Amber, kick us off.
Thank you very much, Craig. Yes, I had the great honour to be made Energy and Climate Change Minister on July the 15th. Whisked into the department, and in the sort of blizzard of introductions, one phrase comes out the whole time: what are your priorities, Minister? Which is a sort of surprising phrase, because you're given this list of what your department's in, and you're basically being asked to choose. Where does your choice start, really, in terms of where they should put the emphasis? What are your priorities, Minister? And I decided that my priorities were, well, quite frankly, the consumers. It's our job in the department to make sure that the consumers get the best deal, and that means price, security, making sure that they have transparency over their bills, and so that is where I've been trying to concentrate my efforts. There are three areas of really our energy bills that we have to look at. There's the area that we can control, which is about the social and environmental levies, and we've had some discussion of that, and there'll be a lot more. There's the framework that we're concentrating on in the department to drive competition, to introduce new energy suppliers, to the so-called challenger suppliers, like we're having very much in the banking sector. And we're trying to influence people's habits so that they use less, spend less, and hopefully can end up with cheaper bills, not just because the markets are reformed, but because they're able to make better choices about using their energy. I just have to, I think, touch on first the so-called Labour policy about a freeze. The problem about the energy freeze proposed by Labour is that it assumes that government controls the wholesale costs of production, which, as we know, they don't. And the biggest costs within our bills is the wholesale prices. And I was particularly irritated with that proposal from Labour, because you really would think Ed Miliband would know that, given, after all, that he was the Energy Secretary and gas doubled and electricity went up by 50% under their watch. So there are some costs we can't control. And I would also add that once this news was out there, despite the fact that chief executives of power companies tried to stay politically neutral, it wasn't long before one broke ground and pointed out that he was unable to put the bills down because he was worried about a Labour government, not as worried as we are, but worried about one that might freeze prices, and therefore he was unable to do anything about it. So if he wanted the evidence, we could see it there. So in terms of the long-term costs, we need to retake a view about trying to make sure that there's sufficient investment in the energy market so that we can bring down some of the costs we can control. We inherited after 13 years a market that had been woefully underinvested, and we're trying to turn that round. It was well known that at the end of last year we took some of the costs off people's bills. The balance of trying to make sure that we get enough support to try and make homes more efficient, while also making sure there's not too much on the bills, is constantly going to be a challenge for government. But we responded to what we thought were the difficulties with people's pockets, regular bills, by taking it off. I would also point out that when we took on government in 2010, there was a whole swathe of additional costs that Ed Miliband had laid out for us. Nearly, we think, £193, which we took off. So although 10% of the bill at the moment is indeed additional levies to help with efficiencies and supporting the vulnerable, it's less than it would have been. And there are some particular new strategies for encouraging renewables, like the RHI, Renewable Heat Incentive, for those of you who don't follow it that carefully, and the carbon capture storage that we've put back onto general taxation. So, what else are we doing to help consumers? Well, we're targeting, particularly for the vulnerable. Obviously, we have the warm home discount, which is £140, which goes to 1 million people. We have the winter fuel payment for pensioners, and we've increased the cold weather payments by nearly 3 times. And as a result of that, despite bills going up, despite the difficulties we know people are having, statistically fuel poverty has fallen, which is a very positive thing. The other thing we're doing is trying to invest in innovation, because there are fantastic opportunities in renewable energy, and the point about renewable is absolutely to meet our carbon reduction targets, but it's also to make sure that we have security of supply, better sense of people's energy being produced locally so they can control it. We have now 15% of electricity produced from renewable sources, which is up on 6.5% under the last government. And part of our strategy is also to broaden the market so that we have more suppliers, more energy companies supplying. We now have 19. We have over 2 million, which is great, 2 million customers. And we've, I hope, simplified gas bills so that, as David Cameron sort of pointed out, we want to go from 400 tariffs, which is now going down to 4. In terms of switching, we know it's hard, but the fact is that it's getting easier. And Ofgem have estimated that they think it can save £200 per switcher, which is encouraging. And in May, we had 240,000 switching, which is great. But we do appreciate that there is potentially a structural problem in the energy market. We're still being dominated by the 6 largest suppliers, which is why we referred the industry to the Competition and Mergers Authority, which are now doing their review. Another reason I don't trust Labour's approach to having a price freeze and then suspending for 18 months is who's going to do that? We have the CMA, which is particularly there to investigate potential monopolies, potential murky behaviour between businesses, and they are the right people to do it. They are independent, and we think are the right people to deliver a result for us that we all want to have at the end of next year. Meanwhile, we're not relaxing. We're taking various action to ensure that the energy companies deliver what we want them to do. We're enforcing compensation. We've empowered Ofgem to take more action, and for the first time, we've made it a criminal offence if you have any sort of market manipulation. So, you're going to push me. Okay, so we're working on the structure of the market, we're working on increasing renewables, but we have an eye all the time on on people's actual bills. Because when people say to me, what are your priorities? It's about making sure that the consumers are able to get a good deal. Thank you.
Simon.
Thanks, Craig. I think an honest appraisal of the current government's record for the consumer would give a mixed answer. I think there have been some significant achievements. The levy control framework, despite lobbyists' strong protestations against it, has provided a good defence for the consumer against ever-rising policy cost commitments. It will be an interesting test of the next government if the levy control framework as it stands and the renewable energy target, which we are bound to meet, come into collision. which side that government chooses to side itself on. I think a second thing that has perhaps been overlooked that is worth recognising is something that the present government didn't do, which was avoiding committing us to a second renewable energy target. The existing one has been very expensive, has done nothing for the environment, and has only led to more inefficient decarbonisation than the trading system that we currently have, or a carbon tax would be. No repeat of that policy means that costs for the consumers who foot the bill are being kept lower. A third thing which has happened that deserves credit is the introduction of auctions for subsidies for different clean technologies, which should ensure that those mostly renewables at this stage are being built at the lowest cost possible. However, I think there are other areas where, shall we say, more work is needed. Auctions are certainly an improvement to electricity market reform, the government's big flagship energy policy that was passed in the energy bill last year, but I think that programme still threatens burdens for consumers overall. It is a huge and complex suite of interventions and government management of the energy system, and despite the improvements that we've seen over the last year, it still risks bringing forward some of the worst elements of central planning combined with the worst elements of the market, where risks are socialised, profits are privatised, and a lot of the decisions in the market are taken actually in Whitehall, where the people making them have less consequence if they get them wrong. DEC argue that the cost there overall will be brought down because certainty for investors is being increased, but very few of the investors that I have spoken to or that our team at Policy Exchange has met with seem convinced. Another sleight of hand seems to surround energy efficiency policy. According to DEC's own documentation on the impact of its policies on energy bills, most of the policies it has on the generation side add costs to bills, but on the other side, its energy efficiency policies lower them, and DEC claims that these more or less cancel each other out. Slight benefit because efficiency lowers more than generation raises. But when you drill down into those figures a bit deeper, what you see is that those savings from energy efficiency are only seen in about a third of homes that actually take up the measures. They see big savings, but the rest of the market doesn't see any savings at all. They see only the rises. Even if those projections were right, it would be troubling. But given that we have seen, I think it's fair to say, efficiency policy underperforming in recent years, there's a real worry whether that part of the policy package can stand up. The Green Deal has not been the policy that people hoped it was going to be when it was introduced, and I fear that ECO was possibly a poor choice for the cost-cutting measures that were applied to it last year. A better resource, perhaps better targeted at the fuel-poor efficiency programme in the next Parliament would be something that could correct some of these moves. Finally, a quick couple of words on the retail market, since I think that was the main theme for this event. Clearly, the energy market has a perception problem, both among the public and among politicians. But I think within that debate, we have also seen relatively little concrete evidence put forward. I think this is why I agree with Amber that the CMA is a vital process in this. There is no other institution that is capable of getting to the bottom of whether there is a case to answer, and the launch of that inquiry is very important. We also need political support for the CMA inquiry's findings and its proposed remedies, if there are any. I would be very wary of politicians jumping to preempt the CMA's findings or to impose regulations that actually impede the market's ability to do its job. We saw a couple of years ago, maybe last year, when Ofgem introduced restrictions on the number of energy tariffs. I think it came as a surprise to absolutely no one that it was the cheapest tariffs that went away. All this is happening at a time when smart technologies offer the potential for great innovation, both in the form of the tariffs and market systems that energy providers provide, and in terms of the way consumers behave and use energy. Too heavy-handed an intervention, and those benefits might never be realised. And that would be harmful both to the new innovative firms, which ministers seem very keen to encourage, and perhaps to the old innovative firms as well. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Simon? Ian, I'm going to come to you next. I'm sorry you're sat in the dark. I'm sure you don't supply this building, I'm sure. Yeah. Far away.
Thanks, Craig. Our discussion is about whether UK energy consumers are getting a good deal. I believe the answer is yes, but I would say that, wouldn't I? The CMA is, of course, currently investigating the energy market to see just how competitive it is. We welcome this inquiry, not because we think the market is fundamentally uncompetitive, but because we think it will go a long way in helping debunk many of the myths that have surrounded our industry. I think it's worth reflecting on why I suspect so many people would disagree with me, and I don't deny that they do. The answer, I think, is complex, but simple at the same time. Energy prices have increased, and better energy efficiency has not counted the fact that 3 of the last 5 winters have been very cold, keeping bills very high. This has happened during an economic downturn, which has hurt incomes, and when supplier behaviour has, to be frank, not always been what it should have been. I also accept that the industry as a whole isn't as transparent as it could be, although I do think British Gas is better than most. It's a complicated industry. I accept that the industry itself can and should do more to help people understand what they're paying for. I know that all of this sometimes combines to feed a widespread view that energy suppliers like us have been raising prices to boost profits. That's categorically not true. And I want to take a few moments to shed some light on what makes up the energy bill and what's driving energy prices. And you may want to turn to the light bulbs on your chairs, which are actually to scale. The first point I want to make is that the first 4 segments on the light bulb, we got Johnny?
Marvellous, I had that, yeah.
The first 4 segments on the light bulb make up the bulk of the bill and are largely external to my business. I don't control them, but they're going up. Between 2010 and 2013, those costs have increased by 22%. Wholesale costs are around half the bill, as Amber says. I buy them as cheaply as I can and always at market rates. Now, despite the inroads small suppliers are making, I still have to buy gas and power for millions of customers every day, almost 40% of the UK market. That's a big responsibility, and I simply can't just turn up on the day and buy all of that energy. I have to buy it well in advance and sometimes 2 or 3 years ahead of when it's needed. That's why, by the way, short-term movements in wholesale markets don't immediately flow through into retail price changes. These long-term contracts ensure the energy will be there when it's needed and provide greater price stability at the same time. Now, there is a bit of a myth, by the way, that I buy all my energy from another part of the Centrica group. In fact, only 7% of my gas and 14% of the electricity sold to my customers last year came from our sister business. All of that was at market rates. Self-supply, in our case, is largely a myth. The second biggest cost on the bill is network charges. That's the cost of moving around the pipes and the wires. And these have risen by 27% between 2010 and 2013. Because this part of the energy industry is uniquely a monopoly, there's no competitive pressure at play. Prices are set by the regulator, and we think not always in customers' best interests. We've called for a review of these costs by the National Audit Office, which I think would help shine a light on whether customers get value for money. Then there's the cost of government environmental and social levies. That's things like insulation, renewable energy subsidies and the warm home discount. These are all great schemes, which I fully support, but this is a regressive way of paying for them. And I think it's now time we had a debate about whether some of these costs, at least, should be paid through a more progressive route of general taxation. I won't labour over the taxes segment of the bill. Suffice to say, we pay them, and we're one of the UK's biggest taxpayers. So that leaves our own operating costs and profits. Our costs have been broadly flat over 5 years, and our profits, I'm not proud of this in some respects, have slowly fallen over recent years and are now around 5% after tax, or about £45 a year on the average dual fuel bill. Note the 45 is not the 102 that Ofgem claim, that's a different debate in itself. I don't think £45 a year or under 5% is unreasonable, but I'm happy to debate that. So I would argue that supplier profits are being kept in check by very competitive markets. Let's look at the facts. I now have, and I counted them this morning, 26 competitors, most recently including Extra Energy, who have arrived from Germany, and Oink Energy, as in the noise that a pig makes, who joined the market last week. These small and intermediate suppliers accounted for around 2.5% of the market last April. Today that's nearly 8%, and we estimate it will be nearer 11% by the end of this year. Between them they supply 5 million accounts, and it's clearly therefore not a market with high barriers to entry or barriers to growth. This growth, by the way, has been helped by exemptions small suppliers have from some government obligations. I would argue that distorts the market and disadvantages some consumers, and may help why some consumers think big supplier margins are higher than they actually are. Consumers are encouraged to switch between suppliers. We now have 12 switching sites, as well as numerous collective switching schemes. And it's worth, I think, stating that my customers, about 25% of them, move their products and tariffs within British Gas every year now. That's not a disengaged market. So I'm having to work harder than ever before to keep my customers. Improving the service they get from British Gas is emerging as a key differentiator. Innovative technologies are now part of that fight-back armour. For a company that's been going 200 years, we are remarkably innovative. I want to name just two. Firstly, smart meters. We've decided to go faster, earlier and bigger than all of our competitors. We have 1.5 million of them on the wall. They mean accurate bills, more visibility of energy. Our customers feel more in control, are happier, complain less and stay with us longer. They're saving around 3% of their energy on average, and that will be enhanced when they get personalised efficient energy reports every month. Smart also opens the way for innovative time of use tariffs, one of which gives free energy on a Saturday or a Sunday. Can you imagine that the feedback from these is remarkably positive? The second innovative technology I want to talk about is our Hive remote heating control. You may have seen the ads, which help customers control their heating and hot water through a smartphone. 100,000 households have these, and on average they change their temperature twice a day. The average consumer changes their temperature on their thermostat twice a year. I would therefore argue that the competitive market has not just delivered for consumers, but for the country also. We are a strong British business, and our profits are used for that purpose. £1.85 for every pound earned has been invested in the last 5 years, and that includes securing £60 billion of future gas contracts and developing the second biggest gas field in the North Sea. We also support jobs. We have 33,000 directly employed people and support a supply chain of 174,000. In conclusion, I'll be the first to admit that energy suppliers don't always get things right for our customers. But I see a market that's delivering some of the cheapest prices in Europe, some of the highest levels of energy security, and just about the highest level of switching. It's also innovating for consumers and giving people informed choice and control. Thank you.
Ian, that was very, very efficient. Ian came with a speech that was twice as long, and I told him he couldn't deliver it, so he's been cutting it out. That was incredibly impressive. Finally, Mr. George.
Thank you. I think, given the other speeches or talks, I'll confine myself to sort of footnotes, just odd comments here and there. First of all, let me say, most of what I would have said just fits with what Simon said. I think the point I would add to that is, in fact, that is a consensus view of more or less everybody who's looked at this market, both in Britain and internationally, who's a reasonable expert in the energy sector. And it's only really in this part of Westminster that view has got lost. I work at the moment in Kazakhstan, in Pakistan, in Australia, and literally people look at Britain at the moment and say, what the hell is going on? Where did you had the best system in the world, and now you're behaving like a bunch of idiots. There is a very strong consensus about a number of things that are necessary to get these markets working properly, to get this system working properly, and where we've gone wrong is in ditching a number of those things. Let me go back then to just the consumer. What does the consumer want? Very briefly, of course, low prices if I can get them, but also stable prices. The old mantra used to be consumers want low and stable prices. The stability bit is quite important because it means that most consumers, not all, some are different, but most consumers do not want prices to go up and down with the wholesale market. They don't want that volatility. They want it smooth. As I say, there are exceptions, but prices, tariffs that link to the wholesale market have actually been tried in the past by Ofgem and were not popular with consumers. Only a few took them up. So don't forget stability is an important aspect. Consumers want good quality of service. We've heard Ian, I think, confess that firms haven't done as well as they should have in this area. I think that is a generally accepted view as well. I would also say that security of supply is a consumer issue. The consumer wants reliable supplies. They want to know when you flick the switch, the light will turn on. And that is really just part of consumer policy. So I think one of the reasons we've gone wrong is we've detached that and treated it as something independent and separate from consumers. Let's have a look at prices, which is the main one, as our chairman said. The difficulty with prices is there are large elements of non-controllable cost in the system. World energy prices is the major one. Also some climate change aspects. I mean, we're in the hands of the science. If the science goes one way, costs will go up. If it goes another way, costs will not go up as much. But there's an element of non-controllability about that. But there are other areas which are controllable, and it's the old story. Just because you can't control everything doesn't mean you shouldn't try and control the things that you can control. One area where we've done very well is on the network charges part of it. So this is the great Cinderella, and here's an important lesson. If you're the Cinderella element of the industry, gas is relative to electricity and networks are relative to markets, you get less political attention. And what do you observe? When you get less political attention and the regulator gets on with the job and the companies get on with the job, you get better performance. So we have a very, very good performance in networks and in charging for networks. Where we've gone wrong, the major area Simon has identified, is climate change policy. And it's not a question of how much decarbonisation to do by 2020 or 2030. It's whatever the target is, do it at lowest cost for the consumer. And we've done that exceptionally badly. So consumers have not had a good deal on that because that is then fed into prices. And of course, as you know, electricity prices have regressive effects on income distribution. So not just are the poor picking up a higher proportionate share of the cost of decarbonisation, they're picking up a disproportionately higher share of the cost of bad public administration, poor policy. And that's a very major component. Regulation has also gone wrong since about 2008. And that was a response to the higher international energy prices, but regulators did not do their job. Regulation, independent regulation, which is a form of devolution, by the way, was invented to stop volatile political preferences, the new minister coming in being given the list of priorities and ticking off the 3 or 4, and then the next minister ticks off the next 3 or 4. It's just not a good way to run an energy system. You need stable, consistent priorities set out in a devolution framework, and that's what independent regulation is. The consumer, you made the right choices, but those are the choices that everybody should have been making over the past 10 years, and they haven't been. And they'll change again, of course, if you lose the next election, so maybe if you win it too. To me, having studied this area for a lot of years, and I've been on the board of the regulator and advised on various reform aspects over the past 20, 30 years, I've been involved in privatisation since the beginning. It comes down, I think, to this. For energy policy, you should look and see what works and what doesn't work. And there's a theory to it. If you're interested in the theory was developed in Glasgow in the third quarter of the 18th century, and you can find it in the books and see the theory, but practically you just need to look what works, what doesn't work. Devolved regulation works. We've seen that. In 2002, the UK was described as the poster child of global liberalisation by The Economist magazine. A very distinguished colleague at MIT, probably the most famous expert in the electricity industry, said in 2007, just before things started to go wrong, that the UK system was the gold standard of international energy regulation. This was a system basically that was developed on the back of the Lawson policy, and that worked. What doesn't work is political meddling. The EMR is political meddling on the grand scale. And it's not just Britain. In 2001, there was a liberalised reform set of markets in California, which were subject to political meddling, which collapsed at the cost of tens of billions to Californian ratepayers. Wherever you see political meddling, you see electricity, energy systems not working. And it really is as simple as that.
Excellent. Thanks very much. We'll open the floor up to questions. Just wanted to start, we'll get the microphone around, we just want to get the kind of conversation going to begin with. Ian, you mentioned that £45 profit rather than the £100 profit. I don't think anybody would say that that is an unreasonable figure for you to be making. What they do think is the fact they're having to pay £1,300 in the first place. I think they'd be happy for you to take £45 out of £100, £45 out of £700. It's not the profit that makes people so angry, it's the overall cost.
Yeah, well, even £1,300 is wrong, that's off Jim again. So I've tried to explain the layout of the bill, and I think if you work the maths out, about 85% of it, what George described as largely not controlled wholesale markets, pipes and wires, various forms of taxes. So that, I think, is the reality of it. Our profits have been coming down slowly over the years, and it is about just under 5% net, and that's our debate for hours, whether that's a fair return, given the risks we've got. The bills have been going up largely because of cold weather, as well as the prices. So this year we think bills will be down by about 11%. And if it carries on like that, it'll be down by 15-20% by the end of the year. So the weather effect's important here. And I'll try to explain that it's the overlay of the weather, the economy. Prices generally have gone up, but for reasons largely outside of our control, which have played through to the issue of the bills. The industry has done itself no favours in terms of lack of transparency, and I would accept that up front. I mean, we declare just about every number there is to declare, profits by generation type, etc., etc. The rest of the industry sadly doesn't, and I've been banging on that they should for years.
So there you go, Rhys. You're Minister for Climate Change. Change the climate, make it warmer, we'll all have lower bills. It's simple as that.
Thank you for that helpful advice. I just wanted to go back on the £145 that you refer to. Doesn't the very fact that there's a disagreement of that scale reveal the lack of transparency in the market, and we can't look at it and say this is the profit level from a company that does publish so much, and yet it seems so opaque where the actual profit is and how much it is, and there's a disagreement between so many eminent people.
Well, it's a good point. We're clearly a public listed company, so in our half-year accounts we have to give the market guidance on what our profits would be, and that's where the £45 comes from. If we didn't do that, we'd be in breach of all sorts of stock exchange rules. I mean, Ofgem inflate the consumption, they use different approaches to how energy's been bought, etc., etc. And I've spent hours explaining to them why it's different. And it's not just us who are saying it, the small suppliers are saying those numbers are also wrong. And I think they have some responsibility to play here in getting the truth about the way the market operates.
We need that on the panel next time.
Yeah.
Can I just make a point? I have a colleague at my institute, a professor at Newcastle, who gives a lecture series of 40 lectures called Income Measurement, and it's about measurement of profit. It's not a simple number that people are concealing, it's just there are lots of different conceptual meanings to the way you measure these things. And, so don't think you're going to come out at the end of the day. It can be more transparent, Ian is absolutely right, but it's not going to give you a simple number because there'll be 20 other possible reasonable ways of measuring profit.
Excellent. Let's take questions. If you can say who you are, but also keep your question short and end it with a question mark, please. Yeah, we'll start you first with your hand. There's a microphone on this.
Thank you. Laura Cohen from the British Ceramic Confederation. We're the trade association for ceramic manufacturers. We have 80 different members around the country, including in your constituency, Minister, who make anything from bricks to tableware to artificial hips. So on your concern about consumers is really important, and we would beg that industrial consumers are part of this as well, because we need secure...
Is there a question?
Yeah. What can you do to ensure greater energy security and improve international competitiveness? Because we're first in the queue, large industrial users, when supplies are short.
Thank you very much. I mean, when I talk about consumers, I mean industry as well, which is why I don't talk about people, just a more obvious phrase. So energy security is part of, absolutely essential part of the department's policy, and one of the ways we do that is by developing renewable. Another way we do it is by having good relationships with our European partners and having, you know, strong interconnectors within Europe so that we can make sure that our supply is, you know, relatively secure. We're actually listed as the 4th most energy secure country in the whole of the world at the moment, ahead of all our European partners. And I'm going to make sure that we keep it that way.
Excellent. The gentleman at the back, because he's very close to the microphone.
Howard Ward, Winchester constituency, Energy Services Director, Auditel Consultancy, Council Member of the Utilities Intermediaries Association. I've got some questions for you, Ian Peters. First one, you mentioned the £45, and you do not agree with me, but whilst that is a fairly low income on £1,300 or whatever that figure is, and whilst you clearly have all the business risk in collecting the monies from that £1,300 or whatever, what you don't have is all the business risk on much of the purchasing in those areas. Clearly when you're buying winter 16 or whatever, or the day ahead and all the rest of it, then you have the normal business risks in buying that on the wholesale market. But when it comes to DNO, NGC prices and all the rest... Sorry?
Can I push you for a question?
Yeah, you
I
can.
want to get as many people in as possible.
Right, then the question very simply there is not the business risk in that amount, so I would expect, and you should expect, to pay less on that. The second one, if I may, very
What's
briefly...
What's the question? There's no question mark, I did say again.
Do you agree with me on that? And if not, why not? Second very brief one is probably more for Stephen Benyon than you, although I understand, since you avoided my question on this last time publicly, you have actually, someone told me you have actually spent some time in BGB, so you should know something about it. You mentioned transparency and everything, but BGB is perhaps the most least transparent, most disingenuous, and in my view the most dishonest company amongst the big six. Why is this allowed to happen there, and when are you going to change your culture within this, what is in my view, grossly dishonest company?
Thank you.
Well, I have no idea what's behind the second question, so I'll have to talk to you privately about that one.
Yeah.
Because I just don't know the background, and I don't think BGB is what you described. We led the industry on giving up what were called auto rollovers, which were just about the most pernicious practice in the industry. So
Only when you were forced to do that.
no, we volunteered it ahead of anybody else in the industry. We led the market.
59 minutes.
We led the market on that. Absolutely, we did. To your first point, I mean, it's clearly true that the transportation and distribution element of the bill is less volatile, although it does flex with volume. Conversely, the commodity market, as we've seen, is hugely volatile. It's effectively a free call option at a point in time, and it's very sensitive to the weather. So if we overbuy or underbuy, we're running very, very significant risks. When you work that through, we have to carry sufficient capital to withstand those shocks, which runs to about £3 to £4 billion. That's a huge carrying cost to offset that risk, and it all needs to be factored into in what's regarded as a fair return.
This gentleman here with the plenary time. Oh, sorry. We'll do next.
Tim Morris, Tata Steel. We make steel. It's a bit shorter than other people's, and also
clear, transparent business.
Yeah, exactly. And in the interest of transparency, depending on how busy we are, we're also the UK's largest energy buyer. But my question is actually relates as much to individual consumers as it does to business. Pipes and wires, 208 to 304 on the very interesting graphic. Is the regulation and the setting of prices in pipes and wires a problem? Because it's gone up a lot. I think I heard two different answers from the panel, and I'm just interested to know whether whether I heard that right, or whether it is a problem, and if so, what needs to get done about it.
Yeah, I think George and I have got different views on this, as you've spotted. I mean, all I'll say is that as part of the price control framework, which is overseen by Ofgem, there are profit ranges that are agreed as part of those negotiations. In the majority of the last 10 years, I mean, most of the DNOs have exceeded those target rates of return. I think that's what needs looking at, as to whether it's sufficiently stringent. That's why that's the NEO to look at it. George will have a different view.
George, why is your view different?
Because it's part of the system of regulation that firms are allowed to beat the targets, and then you claw it back at the next review. I mean, I'm not saying it's a perfect system, but that part of the industry is always regulated, and I think the UK is as good as anywhere still at doing that. The test of it ultimately is the cost of capital, and we've done incredibly well. I mean, I've listened to people from the Treasury saying if only we could make PPP and all those complicated systems work as well to get capital costs down as the system of independent regulation. It really does deliver investment at a very low cost because of the security and confidence that people have, but at the same time there's an incentive element. I understand Ian's position. Ian in this, of course, is a buyer. He is the customer, the consumer.
I'm the biggest buyer of this one.
Exactly, and the consumer is always going to be pressing for low prices, so I don't blame him for that. But I think if you compare it with international practice, this is still at the top of the league. The only worry that I have about it is, of course, part of it is being driven by the the climate change agenda. And so we're getting overbuilding in areas relative to what would be an efficient network structure. But that's really not down. I wouldn't dispute that. What I was saying was that the regulatory system, given the government objectives, this is the part that really does deliver at a good cost.
So is it something you're looking at?
Well, one of the additional interesting things about the network costs, I think, is that they vary so much by region. And that's another thing that we would have to, the consumer would have to watch out for if there were proposed price freeze, because you've got such varied costs in terms of the network costs, there would be quite significant losers in there.
And is it something that you're looking at? Are you happy with the level? When you look at the
it's
breakdown
not one of my priorities at the moment, Craig.
Okay. I think that's a good judgment. It should be.
Yeah, that would be political meddling. We'll take the guy with because I promised him, then I'll come to this side of the room next.
It's Matthew Beach, Utility Week. This is for Amber. What would the future hold under a Conservative government? What would the future hold for Ofgem? More powers, less powers? Would you scrap it, as Labour have suggested? What would you do?
Blimey. I mean, Ofgem is an independent body. It's doing a really important piece of work for us all.
Isn't it a Gwango? Aren't you having a bonfire of Gwangos?
Oh, well, that would be unwise at the moment. We're leaning on them for various initiatives, which they have been delivering on. So there is no prospect of that at the moment at all, no.
We'll take this gentleman's hand here.
Neil Schofield, Worcester Bosch, we make boilers. Not as good as steel, but it's... Question, Minister, the 3 days after you took office, the Home Improvement Fund was scrapped, which was the cashback part of the Green Deal. Now, I know for a fact, because I was on one of the working groups, that that's not your fault. And I also know for a fact it wasn't your predecessor, Greg's fault either. It was the fault of the officials. Industry told them unanimously that the scheme was flawed. A scheme that was supposed to last for 3 years failed within 6 weeks. So my question to you is, what are you going to do about your officials? Because I think the advice you're getting is not good, and I think you should go wider to the industry.
Okay, can I just briefly, just so everybody else can follow your point, is that we launched something called the Green Deal Home Improvement Fund, and the idea of that was to give people additional funds, support basically, in order to make home improvements for energy efficiencies. And we had hoped that it would last for a year, and in fact, because the level of it was clearly set quite high, as you rightly observed before I came in, it was going to go faster than that. So we, as you will know, told the industry, as advised, that we were going to be lowering it, and it closed 3 days later. So I would challenge you when you say, though, that it was a failure. I don't use that word, but something similar, because the idea behind the fund was to try to create as many energy efficiencies as many houses as possible. Of course, it's all been taken up. That's exactly what's happened. It's just that it's all concertinaed into this one portion rather than having it spread out, which is difficult for the industry, but I appreciate. But it is also a fact that there is now all these vouchers out there which are going to be delivering home efficiencies, which is a positive thing, because previous to that, all the various other initiatives that have been tried hadn't been taken up. So this is a success from that point of view. I appreciate it wasn't the plan, and it's difficult for industry to kind of plan along that. And if there's one thing I know is that the private sector needs to be able to plan in order to tool up correctly. So, as I have inquired quite in depth about it, there was extensive consultation beforehand, and so everybody was reasonably surprised by the speed at which it went out. But rest assured that in any new Green Deal home improvement, which I hope to be able to launch, there will be extensive planning and consultation beforehand.
Are you happy with the advice you're getting?
Yes, I'm happy with the advice I'm getting, but we can always improve, I think.
Over a long period, watching these things, I have to say that I think there's been a real hollowing out in the quality of advice that's available to central government in Westminster. It's not just in energy, but you can see it, energy is a prime example. And how would you fix it? Well, the first thing to do is to move back, I think, to a devolved regulation approach and refocus Ofgem as part of in energy. Wider, it's to do with the civil service and the politicisation of the civil service.
And it's not politicised. I found that extraordinary. So I don't find it's a political.
It's extremely politicised.
Well, the same people are in place under different governments.
Yes, it's not politicised in that sense.
Oh, so what sense is it?
In the sense that it's become a delivery mechanism for government rather than an administrative mechanism. Everything is about delivery.
I think consumers want delivery. Why is delivery a bad thing?
People don't want delivery. Have you seen the latest research from Sheffield, which says that 80% of the people are fed up of politicians coming along and saying, we'll deliver this, we'll deliver that. The public want good public administration.
Oh, I see. I hadn't understood that was a difference of terms. So delivery means thinking about it, administration means doing it.
Delivery means a politician says, I would like this done, and gives a very specific target.
But that's a good thing. Then we want.
It's not. It's a very bad thing.
We could probably do this for a couple of hours. The lady here in
Hi, thank you. I'm from Renewable Energy Systems, like Tata Steel, the clues in the name of what we do. We're an independent British business. We're investing in a whole range of renewable technologies and energy storage and demand-side management and benefiting local communities and so on. But our bread and butter is really onshore wind. And that fits nicely with your priorities, where you've said it's a secure and renewable energy supply that's also good for the consumer because it's the cheapest, most cost-effective of all the low-carbon technologies. But can I go back to my board and reassure our investors that the UK onshore wind market is still a good market to invest in when we have other choices abroad?
8 months from an election, probably not.
As the Prime Minister has said, there will be no new subsidies for onshore wind in our manifesto. We have decided we want to rebalance towards other renewable technologies while supporting existing wind farms. But that's the current position we have at the moment.
And I'm interested on that. Ian, is that positive for you to hear that kind of certainty, or does it affect you, or do you have preferences in where you're?
There's a wider point around two levels of certainty which we would want. One is regulatory uncertainty. We've had 15 interventions in the last 5 years. The second is investment certainty, and the worst example of that in recent times is the proposed price freeze, which just creates a big question mark over investment. The specifics of wind, we've had to look at it from a relative affordability basis, and we've chosen not to invest in that. We've put most of our energy, excuse the pun, into securing gas supplies, which is still, the UK is still primarily a gas economy, and that's why we're investing in LNG, exploration and production of gas, rather than wind right now.
Can I just comment on that? I mean, we're here discussing the impact on consumer of various policies. This seems to be one that is heading in entirely in the wrong direction. If we're promoting the most affordable options, and in this case, most affordable renewable technology options, onshore wind is half, roughly, the cost of doing the same amounts of wind offshore. Yet that is the choice that this government is making, I think, fairly clearly for local political reasons. And it makes it very difficult to combine the message of we are doing everything we can to look after the consumer when there is so much effort being taken to rule out or at least lower the use of more affordable technologies and spend much more money on less affordable technologies.
Well, I mean, I appreciate that it's inconvenient when we have to consider what communities want, and it's inconvenient when there's too much regulation. And some of the comments earlier implied, we all wanted a sort of quiet time where the market was going to be set and nobody was going to do anything after that. But given that we have elections, given that elections people tell us what they want, and given that as politicians, we do live in a democracy, we have to respond to what people want. Getting that balance right means listening to what the communities say to us about what sort of energy they want, and wind farms fall into part of that. I mean, we can sit at the table and debate how nice it would be to have certain forms of energy at what price, but we have to take people with us. And as an elected politician, not that I want to pull rank or anything, the fact is, you have these conversations with people in communities, and we can't trash our local community in order to improve our global environmental targets. We have to try and take both with us.
It's a very long conversation about NIMBYism to be had here, but we're running out of time.
We're doing that one tomorrow if anyone's interested.
Gentleman from here, probably be the last one, unless it's a quick question and we can get quick answers.
Matt Smith from Renew UK. So I'd like to follow on this line of debate if that's possible. The issue about public attitudes is very important, it's critical. National polling shows that people support renewables, and that includes strongly onshore. The last DEC tracker showed that 70% of people supported onshore wind, only 12% opposed onshore wind. The others have not made their mind up, or it's not a relevant consideration. So yes, you are hearing people say onshore wind is unpopular, but the vast majority of people do still support it, and that maintains the case at local level around individual schemes. So my question is, the Conservative Party has a challenge on this because a certain part of your voter base has problems with onshore wind, but the majority of Conservative voters want to see you support onshore wind further. How do you square that circle?
What I would say on renewables is we are completely committed as a party to growing our renewable supply. We have other areas we're going to go. It's not just wind, it is solar as well, which has been incredibly successful. And solar has 95% support from the public, which makes wind look hardly popular at all. So, there are other areas we can go as well. But I don't want to characterise us, certainly not as a department, as anything but supportive of wind. But we have, relative to the size of our country, quite a lot of wind farms as it is. And I think we're going to continue to support those, but not to bring on new ones. We have other ambitions to make ourselves energy secure as well, which, as you will know, includes going through evolving shale gas. And that will help with our renewable targets as well. So we are keen to follow on many different areas, and we are also investing quite a lot in the innovation sector with tidal, and we're looking at other, carbon capture storage. We're the only country with 2 big investments trying to develop CCS. So this Conservative Party is completely committed to renewables, just that we're making certain choices with our money and with our political firepower.
Okay, I want to get one more into the woman who's bobbing up and down at the back over there. No, behind, the one behind. Sorry. It was a, okay, fit them both in, says Amber. That means we need short answers.
Okay.
It was just following on from the same thing, really, which was that recently there was an opinion poll by YouGov that said that 3 times as many people would prefer to live next to a wind turbine than a fracking site. And given that, and also your recent consultation that showed 99% of people don't want this trespass law change to make fracking easier under people's homes, are you worried that there's an issue with public consent around fracking?
Sorry, where are you from? Just
sorry, Donna from Friends of the Earth.
Okay, thanks.
We absolutely have to bring people with us on fracking. But how many people in the UK currently live next to a fracking well? Well, none, obviously, so she didn't play. So people don't know yet. We have to reassure them. We have to reassure them. And it's got to be safe, it's got to be reassuring, and I think we can go ahead and bring them all with us, because actually it could be an important part of delivering our anti-carbon commitments.
Quick word for everyone on the panel on this, in that case. Ian, is fracking the answer to giving consumers a good deal?
It's part of it. I think we are, as I say, a gas-based economy. We have a 25% share in one of the fields rather than the companies. I think it's right that we explore all the opportunities to source more of our own gas and make us less reliant on overseas markets.
It will help, and there are parts of the country that will love it. I've just come from Easington, my home area, in the northeast, and there's nothing better than like a bit more industry up there.
No, good.
And please, leave a bit of the cash behind. But apart from that,
Well, talk to Friends of the Earth. Tell them that.
Yeah.
I think the simple answer is we don't know yet, but the only way we're going to find out is by doing the exploratory drilling that will discover how much it costs to get out of the ground in an environmentally sound way.
Yeah.
That's what's next.
Great. Final one from the lady there.
Thanks. My name's Sonia from the Solar Trade Association, and so my question's about solar. And as the wholesale cost of electricity is going up and up and up, obviously the cost of solar is going down and down, and the stable support could soon be subsidy-free and cheaper than the cost of wholesale energy. And so my question is, unfortunately, the way that electricity market reform and the contracts for difference auctions are designed at the moment, they don't really work for solar. And I'm just wondering what you can do to work with us to fix those things so that we still have a solar market going forward.
Hugely supportive of the solar market, aware of the concerns that some of the industry has, which is partly because it's been so successful and is continuing to be so, but we'll be watching it carefully.
And obviously, as Climate Change Minister, when you're warming up the country, then there'll be even more potential for solar.
That, of course, is a very philosophical thought.
Warm, cloudy and wet is what it's going to be, isn't it?
As long as it brings the bills down. I'd like to show appreciation to everyone on our panel. Thanks very much indeed.